The fireplace in Cecilia's room flickered. Greenish and slightly transparent. Cecilia looked over to it, wondering why, at 7 in the morning, Snape would want to speak to her so urgently. Perhaps it was Septimus. Cecilia felt her stomach tighten in anticipation as she made her way from her bed, it having been slept in overnight for once, accompanied by her blanket, cold as the early morning was. She shivered as the indistinct head of the person making contact flickered with the flame. A real fire being unable to be lit while a flue connection was being maintained was one of the drawbacks of more ancient chimneys. Severus? The features were becoming more distinct and Cecilia felt her stomach clench and her hopes sink into it as she made out the features of her brother-in-law. Tiredness and weariness were what Cecilia noted that Cleus's face betrayed, and she wondered why she was being honored by being visited when he must have had so much to do at the ministry. "Good morning, Cecilia." Cleus's words were careful, though not overly restrained, and Cecilia noticed what seemed to be a genuine smile as he spoke. "I trust you are well?" "Cold," Cecilia admitted, trying to yawn as civilly as possible. "But well. You, Cleus?" Yes, he nodded. "I have just come from a ministry meeting. I shan't be long, Cecilia, for I have urgent business which needs my attention. I will come straight to the point. Severus Snape gave me your answer to the question of Remus's potion. That, once solved, you wish to return to Dalton Drive?" "Yes." Cecilia nodded at the question. "Yes," she echoed. "Though not necessarily to Dalton Drive. To be near Septimus. To be with Remus." "Indeed." Cleus's lips shaped the word, there was no expression behind it. "You shall have that." "I can return to be with my family?" Cecilia repeated. Cleus, clearly worn from whichever ministry work he had been completing, was not giving her a lot of confidence in his answers, and this was confirmed when he snapped back a yes. "And it is a promise you can keep, Cleus?" she insisted. Cecilia needed to be clear on the detail. She gave detail, and it was necessary in her science work, in all science, whether biological or chemical. Detail in the method as she journeyed to her unknown destination using whichever tools she could. As such, she knew, she had a good deal to bargain with. "Yes." Cleus's tone had softened a little, he was now talking to her as if she were a child, which meant that he had conceded a point. Besides, he didn't look particularly well, which wasn't surprising really, with what he had to deal with. "Insofar as I can, notwithstanding being able to see into the future. Ask Ragnhild Anderson about that." And was that a hint of humor? Cecilia felt her defenses ease, and she watched as a hitherto unknown expression crossed her brother-in-law's features, one which took her by surprise in the greenish glow. Perhaps that's not a bad idea, Cecilia also felt an afterthought had in her mind. "Do you really feel you can solve the potion, Cecilia, for Remus? I mean, you have been at Durmstrang for a good deal of time, and have sent a vast amount of information to Severus Snape. This has helped our cause against conjurism, and I feel when you are in contact with our specialist about the art of the wise their work has already been well advanced." Lily, Cecilia mused. She knew that Lily Potter had been delving into its history. So, Lily would be in touch. So like Cleus to talk about our specialist and not name her. It was a wonder he wasn't talking about Remus as being his brother. Cecilia's mind was invaded by another name as it mulled over that of Lily Potter. Whatever their differences, whatever Henrietta had done to her and how she had treated her, Cecilia could not feel anything other than pity for the ambitious witch, that she had died working for the job she loved. In fact, it was almost a privilege, fighting for what you believed in. In fact, wasn't that worthy of admiration? Wasn't that what she, Cecilia, was doing? Certainly I can talk to Lily, but I can only tell her what I have already shared with Severus, plus anything else I glean from here. You have the wizard at Edgewords who wrote the book and you've translated it. and it's being published today. Felixson has managed to get it past the ministry under a technicality of being conjecture. I have already put forward a countermeasure regarding public safety and security, but it will take a good week for it to be heard by the ministry and also by the non-wizard government. Were I to make it an emergency measure, it would only heighten interest and draw attention, sensationalize the work even more. And I am sure you are able to manage things just fine, Callias, replied Cecilia, generously, looking over to her bed where the 2 useless potions that Snape had sent her were lying, wrapped carefully in cloth and laid to rest. As for Remus, I am working as hard and as fast as I am able. I too don't wish to draw attention to myself, and it is fortuitous that Severus has been in touch, that I am able to discuss my findings with his expertise, and that I can see Septimus. Her voice trailed off as Cecilia's words were replaced with pictures of her beautiful son in her head. Then this is the best we can do, and it is indeed the best, Callias added, and Cecilia felt her face harden, doubt freezing in her features. We all do love Remus, and we too are all fighting for him. Yes, Callias. Thank you. And I do hope you manage to rest. We need you too, she added. The fire dimmed and, as the morning sun edged its weak rays through the window of her room and reminded of her lessons that needed to be taught that Saturday morning. Had that really happened? Had the great politician, that Machiavelli of this magical world, really confided in her as it seemed to Cecilia he had? Perhaps this too was part of a big plan, one to bend her to one cause or do his will in another. She looked over at her bed again and her thoughts drifted to Severus, and the genuineness of her dialogue with him. If Severus Snape was able to make her feel that at peace, then whether Callias had maneuvered her into a corner was irrelevant. Her work was still the same and, one way or another, whether Callias came good on his word or broke it, Cecilia would be with Septimus and Remus, and her brother-in-law would not be able to do much about it. 88,888,888. You have confirmed with Cecilia that she will be returning home? His third meeting in the space of 24 hours, and nearly 40 hours without a wink of sleep, and Callias knew it must be his last if he were to get through the ministry work and cabinet briefings later that afternoon. Indeed. She was most cordial about it. It is good, I think, in such uncertain times, that we can rely on Cecilia now. You say there is no progress with Remus's condition as of this morning? In his dark grey robes, stained a little with dirt and wear of the last 2 days, Callias sank down into the chair at which Snape was just turning. None as yet, nothing definite. However, he has not changed in his condition. Whether this is a good thing or not, I cannot yet determine. That Cecilia will work with you, Severus, that is a blessing. How are the children at this present moment? How are the non-wizards? All of the students here are occupied, both wizard and non, on the tasks set for the Halloween games. They have been left to their own ingenious problem-solving devices and are even now, such is the hour before even their breakfast, practicing spells, devising plans and huddling together to work out their strategies, or so I have been reliably informed by their heads of house. Perhaps teaching has missed a trick, Callias, in that it all should be discovery learning. Snape curled his lip a little in response to his own sardonic humor, but it took a good deal of effort on Cleus Lupin's part to even break into an acknowledging smile. She has sent what was needed, continued Snape, aware that Cleus's visit was not in the capacity of either Minister for Magic nor head of the Reciprocators. It has cut down a lot of my own trial and error. We have an agreed hypothesis, its validity checked with my colleague in France. It is lucky that Draco Malfoy has deemed it vital we collaborate. It makes things a good deal easier for us as long as we produce results. What results does Strasbourg require? For yourself, Severus? Merely that we are indeed collaborating. As samples of our correspondence are being taken directly to Draco Malfoy himself, rather than to any particular specialist, then I suspect that it is just the fact that we collaborate is the important point rather than the nature of our dialogue. I wouldn't be too certain, Severus. I attempted to ascertain the whereabouts of the elf, a Mysteria, who translated the original art of the Wize from Norwegian for us. We have conclusive evidence that he was also behind the break-in and robbery of certain artifacts from my office last month. When we went to the Mysteria office to arrest him, Gregor informed Mick Mullen that he had gone to see his family in the Alps and wouldn't be back until the autumn. We traced him to Strasbourg. But the trail has gone cold. He leaned back in his chair, nursing his temples with his fingertips. Severus Snape flicked his wand to pour out a glass of water for Cleus, and the minister nodded, his eyes still closed. "Are you taking your medication, Cleus? You do need to rest with the wolfspan. You remember that?" "Yes indeed," Cleus replied, taking the water and trying not to snap at Severus. He had indeed been missing his bitter-tasting tablets and should indeed have made sure he had had some. A glass jar appeared next to the water that Cleus had been given, and he looked at them, and then back to Severus Snape. "Thank you, old friend. I always have a good deal for which I'm grateful to you." Severus Snape took a few steps towards Cleus, before stopping, trying not to hurry the discussion. Both needed to catch up with a few things, but the progress and depth to which Cleus was able to speak was hampered by his werewolf symptom-induced lethargy. "Shall we speak when you feel more yourself, Cleus? We do have a good deal still to discuss." "Thank you, Snape, for your kindness. I have other ministry work to which I must attend. Shall we be brief?" "Indeed. You asked about Sam. You wished to know whether he has continued with his further tuition, which he will need to apply for his internship in January to the European Parliament?" "I did. He has attended all sessions that Minerva has arranged, as has Fraser Blewett. Both candidates are equally suited and will be equally qualified to apply for the internship. It is a pity that there is only one British place available. Both candidates must prove themselves," nodded Cleus, "and I am sure they will impress their talents and abilities upon a dozen European panelists. Now, you in turn, asked me about flu security. My answer is yes, it is as secure as I can possibly feel confident. Regulus Black has arranged it." Snape paused, himself reaching for a glass, which he had made silently appear next to the one he had offered Cleus, and took a sip. In that case, he mused to himself, the network was watertight, there was nothing Regulus Black didn't know about the network, and, with regards to building untraceable connections, there was no one second to Sirius's brother. "We are indeed safe," nodded Snape, and was about to continue when Cleus leaned forward out of his chair and gripped him around the wrist, staring at him, his eyes bloodshot from continued self-denial of rest and sleep, of constant worry and unresolvable problems. "And it must be, for all our sakes?" His words were gasped, and, while he, Severus Snape, continued calmly and professionally, he couldn't help but think how it was that he had never seen Cleus like this, so far removed that he was from his usual smooth, unflappable self. "She must," he echoed, as his voice trailed quieter. "I was wrong, Severus, to send her away. I should have treated her with more kindness. We provoked others to pick at her faults too." "Henrietta?" Cecilia expressed sorrow for her passing. "I mentioned that Lily would be in touch regarding the historical contexts." He fixed his expression on Snape again. "Lily must do her bit, regardless of her reluctance and preoccupation with ... whatever it is that James thinks is the matter, he has not confided to me. Cecilia must have all the knowledge and understanding that we possess at her disposal, and she is as safe as she can possibly be out at Durmstrang. We have spent immeasurable time and resources to make it so, and only Cecilia alone can break through the opposition's attack. And she knows it," thought Snape to himself. She has just about reasoned it alone. She has stopped fighting her position now. She knows it is one of strength rather than weakness. Aloud, he continued, when I spoke to her she knew what she was doing, Callias, and was happy to do so. You said so yourself. That was an easy conversation to have. Callias looked confused at Snape for a moment, before nodding, as if a lagging memory had just dropped itself into its waiting neural space. I am concerned, Severus, Callias went on, about the publication of the book. It will disturb a lot of people. It couldn't have come at a worse time. What with the deaths in the Alps and the German Black Mountains. People want evidence onto which they can hang their ideas, and they have lost faith in what we tell them. While I remember. He leaned forward and handed Snape a thick bundle of parchment. For you. It appeared in my office yesterday. Cecilia, he added. A delay of about 3 weeks. Thank you, Callias replied, eyeing the work critically. Despite her fastidiousness, I fear most of it is irrelevant now, considering our remarkable progress in just over 2 days. There is trouble again in the East, Severus, Callias continued slowly. We know little about it, but I suspect that it is derived from Albus Dumbledore. It is containable, I hope, but Felixson's little book doesn't help. Our numbers in the reciprocators are strained as it is, and that would be all right if the little capacity I built into the wizards and witches covering the country did not account for said colleagues having their own paid work to do, and families to look after. They cannot sustain such intensity and get the job done effectively. I must think of another way. It is believed they are communicating using a hitherto unforeseen loophole in the pensive system that we are yet to overcome. We suspect a terrorist attack, he added, almost as an afterthought, but Severus Snape had never seen his colleague in such a state. He did indeed need his rest. The reciprocators will prepare, as they always do, Snape added, sympathetically. I had speculated myself and too have made plans for the students. Nearly all of the non-wizards will depart after the Halloween games. Hedgewood's will provide its unique protection should the school come under attack for the young witches and wizards who remain. He watched the expression in Callias's face change as he shifted in his seat. Old magic, he whispered, nodding to himself. It all comes back to that. And now, yes, I will indeed rest. You must contact me, Severus, should any issue of urgency arise. Pensieves being used to control thoughts, Snape thought, though pound to a penny it's them controlling the conjurists, thoughts transmitted subconsciously as messages passed. Good news that twits were becoming more popular and the flu network was in decline. When the time came, it would make a mass uprising easy. I will contact you, Callias. You must rest, he added, shifting his weight between his feet. For you are also vital. You must keep your health. One last thing, you asked about the pensieves here. Callias got unsteadily to his feet, reaching out all the medication that Snape had prepared for him. That the non-wizards who are able are going home, that the students may communicate with one another. Yes, I see no reason why they may not gain access to the network again. However, they must be aware that their connections will be monitored as a matter of course by the Ministry for reasons of security. I shall make it known, Snape replied. Now, before you rest, old friend, any word on Tabitha? None, nodded Callias, withdrawing his wand. As it should be, replied Snape, half to himself, as Callias stepped wearily to the fireplace under the past headmaster and headmistress pictures. You really should try to get yourselves organized, chided Aberforth from his frame as Snape began to step towards the door to his office. I left the two of you an easy job, or so I thought. So we all thought, Professor, replied Snape to the former head of the reciprocators and Hedgewood's #1 headmaster to have the best beard, as voted for by the previous year's Newt student leavers. So we all thought. 88,888,888. What do you say, Sirius? I have to agree with you. Reluctantly, I will add. Sirius's bed was no longer in the living room at Grimmauld Place. The werewolf survivor was now able to walk a little and get around with help downstairs, which meant he could do his bit for incoming and outgoing reciprocators as they went about their grueling shifts. It would probably have been better for either head of the movement to have discussed the announcement that they had jointly signed and sent to headquarters that evening than the missive, in dark brown ink on parchment. In his opinion, James Potter thought the message too controversial to rely on the judgment of its recipients given the past history of said subject of the message. Reluctantly? The woman is mad. Callias sent her to Durmstrang for her own good, and/or ours. What's he playing at bringing her back to us now? I would imagine he has little choice. 12 hours on his feet walking the city streets and suburbs of Manchester, on call to attend any affray reported to the ERAs, or offer assistance. His head ached. Any thought of devising strategies to assist in easing their burdens James had dismissed. He had neither the time nor the impetus. And I say it is a big mistake. She has caused so many problems by being here in the first place. Lily? James was about to discuss the matter further when his wife got to her feet. That's just my opinion, she huffed, annoyed, then added, I've got to go, much to the surprise of her husband, and James widened his eyes as he was about to ask her to remind him of her destination, as he had surely forgotten. I said I'd help Harry ready for next week, came Lily's reply to her husband's unanswered question, and, to be honest, I just don't feel like sitting round here hearing how brilliant Cecilia Lupin is when her husband is lying ... when Henrietta is. She looked down, her face grumpling. James got to his feet and pulled her close, burying what he could of the beginnings of her sobs. It's okay ... go to Harry ... give him my love too. Tell him we are really looking forward to Saturday, and going with him to Hedgewoods. Lily sniffed into her sleeve before looking between them both, a little defensively. Now was not the right time to tell her Severus's plan to have her liaise with Cecilia regarding Lily's research into old magic. James sat back down next to Sirius, the papers detailing that week's shifts blotted with crossings out and amendments in red and blue ink, his brow wrinkling with tension. She knows nothing of what Cleus wants? Sirius leaned in towards his friend. What Severus wants, James corrected. He wouldn't have suggested it if he didn't think it was vital. He has enough to do with the non-wizard students leaving. Do you think that it is a sensible course? Sirius shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a discomfort that felt as if there was an unscratchable itch working its way down his spine, and had been annoying him for several days. On the whole, he couldn't very well risk causing them harm if he thought they were getting ill from being at Hedgewoods. They have done a few weeks at least, so Cleus's objective of non-wizards experiencing the school has been met at least in part. At least that's better than them having never been. Better? Bath Bradel, just back from her own intense 12-hour watch, having clearly overheard them talk as she apparated by the stairs side as she sank into a chair opposite both James and Sirius. She nodded at Sirius before nursing her head as she yawned the yawn of the witch under strain. Better, James? What if there starts being fatalities amongst the students? What would the prophet make of that? Never mind the non-wizard media. Not to mention the conjurists, I'm sure they'd have a field day. Fatalities? If Severus's suspicions are true, said Sheba, nodding her head. Neville was telling me about the work that he had been doing with the plants at Hedgewoods. Bath Bradel was Neville Longbottom's godmother, and she smiled as the realization that she may know something they didn't played on both James and Sirius's features. He was telling me that Severus had told him that there are many accounts of non-wizards living with wizards, or in close proximity, talk about short lifespans with the ability to do magic. It would seem that it is some sort of autoimmune defense system which leaves the body open to illnesses. Wow. Neville did tell you a lot. Well, no, not really. Bathsheba looked a little sheepish as she leaned forward. He showed me a document that Severus had shown him. Lily had written it. Didn't you know that, James? Probably when she was researching old magic, James conceded. I've enough to do here organizing us reciprocators, let alone my own work. She used to tell me lots of things. We've just got so busy I can't even remember a time when we were at home together, let alone able to have a proper conversation. Did the work say anything else? Bathsheba drew herself to the edge of the chair she was sitting on now, and looked at James intently, her spiral, telephone cord curls bobbing as she spoke. It isn't the magic that kills directly, it's eventually. Which makes sense, Bathsheba added, her own opinion coming into play. And it's why non-wizards held witches and wizards in suspicion, lived apart from them, drove out and persecuted those in their communities whom they believed to be witches, I suppose. It does make sense, agreed James as Sirius laid back against the settee, trying to relieve an ache that was beginning to creep across his shoulders. You all right, Sirius? To which his friend nodded untruthfully. Neville said that Severus had told him that because wizards in our country we are spread out and magic isn't as concentrated, non-wizards have medical advances. And we have forgotten the effects of magic on non-wizards, finished the original quota, his deep voice reverberating around the reciprocator headquarters living room. Despite the noble cause that is integration, he added. I came with this. In Sirius's direction Snape waved a small amber vial in the air. Wolfspan, he explained. I wanted to get this to you as soon as possible. How do you feel? Okay, nodded Sirius, and rather tired. Yes, Callias felt like that this morning. I've just overseen Breakcast and the students preparing for the games. And what does Cleus feel about the non-wizards going? Accepting. He threw the second potion to Sirius, who caught it and prized off the stopper with his thumb. Gripping it, he slugged back the liquid only to gag violently. If educational inclusion is to work. But we would be acting unethically if we suspect a situation may be causing some of the pupils in our care to suffer. They cannot remain even if in doing it may prove a hypothesis. What the heck HKK, is this? Wolfspan, Snape repeated simply. It won't take long till you feel less unwell. It's good to see you, Severus. Bathsheba, fatigue making her lean back into the chair now as she rested. How are the rest of the students? And yourself? Well, he nodded. I wouldn't be here now, only the heads of house are overseeing the students' plans for the Halloween games. Now, do you feel any better yourself, Sirius? I do, Sirius nodded. I thank you, Severus, he added, before frowning. You're in contact with Cecilia now, how is she? I mean, will she be able to get hold of something which will help Remus? Or help you help him? I can't bear the thought of my being alright, or as alright as I can be while he's stuck in hospital still, with no end in sight. She has new hope to drive her on her purpose. Isolation has helped her enormously. And shielded her from events in this country. Cecilia is able to solely focus on her work, and yes, that includes everything she can conceivably do in helping her husband. What purpose is that, Sirius? Bathsheba, wrapped in the conversation that was unfolding in front of her, sought clarification. That of recovering her family life, Septimus and Remus being at the very heart of this. I am sure Cleus would not object to me telling you this, nor Cecilia herself. And Cleus has agreed to this. Indeed. It was his suggestion. And she needs all the help she can get. I was hoping to speak to Lily, James, if she is here. No, she's not, Severus. And I don't think now is the right time to talk to her. She has provided you with enough. But she is still distraught over the death of Henrietta. We all are, of course. But she has lost her best friend. It was bad enough just knowing about Cecilia working for us again, but it has brought up the past. And, of course, Sam's imminent tryout for European internship. She's nervous for him. And it's where Hen was. Well, she needs to put that behind her, James, said Sirius, unexpectedly. Harry's taken over the work. Can he help, Severus? Then Lily has no cause to get herself worked up about Cecilia, and she can get used to the idea that she's working to help us all. Harry will have no emotional investment. Lily's in a unique position, a crucial position, and hating Cecilia won't bring Hen back. Halloween games? Bathsheba, aware that James was about to argue in defense of his wife, leaned towards Severus Snape. The students are competing with one another, in Quidditch mainly, and problem-solving and teamwork. The voice came from McMullen. He too had been out on shift that evening and was leaning by the frame of the kitchen door. You right, James? Ye. Reckon so. And Harry's having his party, of course. Next Saturday, isn't it? Ye. James looked at Bathsheba questioningly. You're invited too, all the reciprocators are. We'll visit the HQ as usual, of course, on a rota, but Merlin knows we've worked hard enough. A break will do us good. I know I am looking forward to watching the Orient eating. And then the Quidditch finals on straight afterwards. Saturday, you say? McMullen strode over to them, smiling as he caught several of their glances, his outdoor robes damp from the evening's rain. The 30th? Doesn't the Halloween Quidditch match take place on, well, Halloween? Didn't you know about the Halloween games? Asked Bathsheba of the era, usually the most well-informed of the reciprocators, doubtfully. Of course. But, you'd think you'd stick to tradition, he qualified, looking mock-accusingly at Snape. The order of the games has altered that, replied Snape, not rising to the impish jocularity of the elder Mullen twin. The non-wizards will return on the Sunday. In addition, Saturday is a better day for families to attend. Are all the non-wizards leaving? Bathsheba looked up intently at Snape. I've been trying to follow this up with the non-wizard newspapers, but I really can't find anything that's been reported. I was expecting there to be at least some negative comments. Yes, you'd think so, agreed Snape. However, to be frank, most non-wizard parents have written in to offer support. Just 2 non-wizard students went when they first became ill, and one of those seeks to return. That's going to be a good thing, when Mrs. Lestrange gets her way then. Quibball can't be played just with wizards. Mick, sipping deeply from his cup, grinned as he was greeted with looks of quizzical incomprehension from Bathsheba, James, and Sirius. Come on, Severus, let us in on the plan, insisted the latter, when Mr. Mullen the elder fell silent. Snape glared at him for a moment before looking back at the other 3 reciprocators, their exhaustion replaced with a spark of intrigue. In January, we are trialing a new sport. Madame Lestrange is introducing Quibball. Quibble? Quibball, corrected Snape, giving McMullen another stare of disapproval. And we are not at liberty to discuss it. Madame Lestrange, in her capacity of Minister for Sports, has her renunciation speech prepared for just before Saturday's Quidditch game. She will not be happy that we even know its name, he added, rebutting the anticipated begging for information, mainly from James and Sirius, which is the reason that he knew Mick had mentioned it. So I take it that you will all be at Hedgewood's on Saturday? Indeed. We wouldn't quibble about that, would we, James? No, would hate to let the side down, he replied, deliberately missing the point. Sirius rolled his eyes at his friend's unwillingness to play along. Will you be staying for supper, Severus? James got to his feet and made his way towards the kitchen. Molly Weasley has cooked a small supper for us overnighters. I am sure there will be more than enough to go around. Sadly, I must decline, Snape replied, following James's path to the kitchen. I must return to Hedgewood's. Would you be kind enough, James, to contact me when Lily has returned? It's vital that I liaise a contact with her and Cecilia." There was a slight pause, before James nodded. "I do not know how long she will be tonight, but I am certain it will be no later than tomorrow. I expect she will be grateful to discuss Sam's progress at the same time." 88,888,888. Thursday. The day had been hard going. Cecilia's mind on her work, coupled with lack of sleep and students silently demanding the perfection of the lesson she was supposed to be teaching, was not a good combination. Remove one of those factors and Cecilia was sure her lesson would have been successful. Teaching the process of evolutionary biology and mixing up the dominant and recessive genes as she did so was just one of the mistakes she had made. It had been her first lesson with the fourth that week. The school was divided, not by age or by any means ability, but by position in the tower, which depended upon chance entry. Upper tower alternated teachers with lower, and were opposing Quidditch teams. Not that a great deal of the sport was encouraged, and, when it was played, the emphasis was on mental and physical fitness rather than the camaraderie and sportsmanship that Hedgewood's Quidditch was played. The students here were good at Quidditch, rather, they were extremely skilled at it, which made them pretty average when it came to one another, but pretty formidable opponents when playing other teams, even the professionals. Her upper fourth lesson had consisted of too many tiny mistakes, ones which couldn't easily be glossed over given the keenly brilliant minds that sat before. And Cecilia knew exactly the reason why. Like a newfound crush that had bonded itself to her mind, the two potion vials which lived in her suitcase were taking up a good deal of her mind, and it kept wandering, rather than focus on the task in hand. And, as she sat with her work around her, she vowed she would be entirely focused on her work when she was teaching, for, while she had recovered well, Cecilia knew she owed it to her profession never to get that exhausted again. For it was sleep which was the only factor she had under her control. A lot of work, thought-provoking, potentially future-changing work. But she had to be here to do it successfully, with the facets that this school offered to do it, not least the cold, isolating existence. And she must be ready to receive, process and assimilate information by whichever means it came, whether from other teachers here, Lily Potter, or whoever from the reciprocators who would actually be in touch. Students who actually asked tangentially insightful questions which often made her think about her research, even when she was committing her own thoughts in mind-numbing, deliberately detailed prose. And Severus Snape, who was working as hard as she was, and managing Hedgewood's at the same time. It was such thoughts which were driving Cecilia to put down her parchments and quills and get to her bed, to rest her mind and start afresh the next day. She could put her mistakes behind her and start again, and also, she told herself sharply, that getting angry with herself that other people were in worse situations than herself, and that actually Cecilia Lupin was in quite a strong position and she had better not forget it, would not help matters one bit. As Cecilia made her way across her room to her bathroom, emerging 10 minutes later feeling much better, her mind considering whether she would be able to speak to Snape tomorrow about her idea for physical science connections to her work, and to Remus's potion, namely energy levels in the cells, which is where she had begun back with Harry's potion in the other rolls. Her eye was caught by a flash of green in the hearth place. Pajamaed and dressing gowned, she knelt before it, waiting to see who it was who wanted her. The hour not being late, and Snape in particular knowing that her habit was to work late. She watched in the dimness of the candle flame as the flash passed through the hearth place again, and Cecilia knelt closer and hissed in a whispered shout, "Who's there?" Another streak, and Cecilia's heart began to beat a little faster. Maybe Snape had brought Septimus up to his office to speak to her. She leant closer still and whispered a hello. As she did so, a face appeared, outlined in the green glow, and she tried to pick out the features. "Hello," she said again, trying to guess at the appearance. "Severus? Lily?" Cecilia added as the face came more into focus, as one might an old television set, wobbling a little as the viewer adjusted the tuning. "Cecilia? At her name, Cecilia stared harder at the image, though it was difficult to see who was there. Yes? A woman's voice was the one to which she now replied, and Cecilia could feel her heart quicken, as well as sink. Was this the moment she had been bracing herself for, which is why she couldn't teach well today? The encounter which had been on her minutes since Cleus, and then Severus had mentioned it. Cecilia? It repeated. Cecilia relaxed a little with relief. It wasn't Lily Potter. But if it wasn't her then, who was it? Locating her on probably the most secure flu connections in the world. It's Cecilia, she replied more definitely. And then the image clicked into view, as if the caller had fixed on the correct frequency of light, and Cecilia felt her heart begin to melt. Petunia. But why? How? It's good to see you, Cecilia. You look well. Fat you mean, bet. Cecilia corrected her friend on the meaning of the euphemism. I keep snacking on the wrong things. As usual, she added. But never mind me. How? Why? It's been so long since I've seen you. Well, Regulus was the one who established your connection, Petunia went on, her friendly face smiling back at Cecilia. There has to be some perks, even if we abstain from magic most of the time. Are you keeping well? Considering, admitted Cecilia. I have been worse. It's been good to be able to be of use, and not felt disposable, finished Petunia, not being able to avoid her empathetic nature. Cecilia nodded. But, how is everyone? Darren? Dudley? You and Regulus? We're all well. Regulus has just turned down a managerial position. Too many hours. We are in the lucky position that we can. You know, we try to be involved as little as possible with the wizard world. He's trained Dudley. Dudley's qualified with British Flu now. But he's not took up a job with them. He went into the portable pensieve business in the summer, making a lot of money. Oh, I am pleased, enthused Cecilia, meaning it. It was always a boon to hear good people getting on, especially this branch of the Black family, who had not so much shunned magic, but chosen not to embrace it. How are the others? The reciprocators? She broached the subject with caution, as Lily's sister and obviously having blood ties with that respect, with Regulus being Sirius's brother, they weren't entirely without connection to the past which Cecilia preferred not to think about. Under pressure. The country has become more aware of conjurism, and as such magic and non-magic have become more heightened over these past few months. Just as the conjurists want. Of course, added Cecilia. Even I could have told Cleus that ignoring them, or trying to oppose them would result in what the conjurists want most, recognition. Come to think of it, I think I did tell him. I am sure you did, Cecilia. But as you know, even if it were himself coming back in time to tell Cleus Lupin that deliberate student integration and forced collaboration would backfire, politically at least, he wouldn't have believed himself. Cecilia could see her friend smiling, she did too. How like Petunia Dursley that she could make her see a view of things in such a way that made total sense. That would make her feel less vulnerable to, at the very least, her own self-doubt, and in such a way that would appear that Cecilia would have come to the conclusion on her own, given time? Such was the power of the empathy-giving witch. How about everyone else? Tunks? She continued, further into potentially dangerous territory. She is well, but again seems to be under a lot of pressure. Freya is still with them, and in a good place, too. Tunks says she has begun studying, she wants to make something of herself. What she wants to do Freya has yet to decide. But a positive move, I think you'll agree? Yes, nodded Cecilia, another worry ticked off her list. A pity, was getting used to her visiting, Petunia added, her eyes closing momentarily in the flame. She's not seeing Dudley anymore? No, they have parted company. But I know Tunks is keeping a very close watch on her. She has matured and grown up this last year and a half. I know she particularly wants to see you, Cecilia. Then it shouldn't be long. Glius has promised that I will return as soon as my work here is done. Then I can be with Septimus, with Remus. Start to make a good life again. Then that is good news, replied Petunia, nodding in the green, heatless flame. That you can put that awfulness a few years ago behind you is a good thing. There was a pause. The pause filling itself up wordlessly between them. The pause that told her friend what she really didn't want anyone else to know. It is easier that Henrietta is not around, Cecilia. You cannot blame yourself for feeling like that. You did not cause her death. Do not feel guilty. Cecilia turned away, the tears in her eyes, brought forth not by her self-assumed feelings of guilt, but for her situation still, away from her family, that she had parted in such a way from the reciprocators, from Remus. You can't blame yourself for all of that. No one here asked you to do anything more than what you could. You can't help it if people here aren't what you expect, and treated you badly, because they did. Cecilia, you cannot think them blameless for this. Cecilia sank her head into her lap, the stress caused from the trauma of these events rising up in her mind again, unable to be stilled, unable to be conquered. Then, as a light caught her eye in the fireplace, Cecilia noticed Petunia had her hand towards her. A flu nudge. She put her hand forward too. Briefly, like a ghost of a feeling, she felt her friend's hand close around hers. Her mind filled with happiness at her friend's gesture. The times when the children were tiny and Petunia would suggest to walk around a park or woods. Nothing magical, just a normal break in the fresh air. A cup of tea. A picnic. That was what she was like, Lily's sister. Everything as she wished, whether magical or not. No code or precedent to follow. She was as much as Cecilia was different to the wizards. But the difference was, Cecilia had often told herself, was Petunia's brilliant presence of spirit that was able to take it all in her stride, ignore it, cope with it. Oh, how she longed to have that ability, to get past all of this ... all of them. Think about what I know Severus has done for you, Petunia continued as Cecilia half smiled at her. Think about the power you felt these last few days, knowing that you will get what you want, and you will get it in a way you know how. You have lessened Remus's odds of survival, being you, and you need to know deep down, Cecilia, that you are the only one who can. You are treading a path none of them can take, because of your history of the other place. Hold on to this, Cecilia. The past had to happen to help you get here. None of the reciprocators has been through the crises you have, in the other place. They can't think like you. Cecilia smiled, and they loosed hands. How was it that Petunia knew exactly the right things to say? Severus said, he did say, that no one hates me as I think they do. James said that too, Severus said. But there's still something wrong, isn't there? Something you aren't telling yourself? What is it, Cecilia? You don't have to answer me. Before you do, think carefully. Because if you don't find out now, your depression could last all your life, and affect those who you love the most. And I can tell it's not your work, or teaching. I am so glad you are my friend Petunia. I just wish I could do something as awesome for you as you do for me. Every day, Cecilia. You do that every day. By reminding me that despite my sister's insistence that I embrace magic, that non-magic choices are just as bit as good. Remember, I wouldn't have sent Darren to Hedgewoods had there not been non-wizards this year. I needed him to be aware that magic isn't the be-all and end-all. And there it was. The reason that Petunia had an affinity with Cecilia. Had a friendship with her. The eras, the reciprocators. Even the conjurists demanded perfection. Tabitha Penright was only just accepted, and that was through her true brilliance in one magical area. In a world where magic and non-magic coexisted, up until then, with little or no conflict or hierarchy, perhaps more accurately described as snobbery, still existed, in the same way that unfashionable clothes, or not owning your own home were seen as areas where the have-nots were, at best, sympathized with, and at worst chagrined for their lot. Different to the other place? Sometimes she wondered if it weren't in some ways worse. Will you be able to connect again? Another night? It's so good to be in touch, Petunia. Of course, my dear. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. It's handy when you're married to the world's best flue engineer. That evening, when the fire had eventually dimmed, and a late autumn wind tore past the window bringing with it angry winds and thumping rain, Cecilia rested a little easier, the fire of hope having been stoked. The next day, not having even begun, easier to traverse. Cecilia knew she mustn't be greedy with her wishes and, instead of wishing that she was now with Septimus, and that Remus was well, knowing that she had some measure of her own contentment that she could trade for these, she would even have given the bottles beneath her bed, although they may yet prove of some practical use here, had been made by Snape for a purpose which didn't even exist, and served merely as psychological instruments now. All these things being relative, nevertheless. Cecilia went to bed that night in the freezing Durmstrang, an unique exile with a unique set of tasks in front of her to complete, happier than she had done in a very long time. 88,888,888. So, let's go through this again. Darren Dursley, aloft by a couple of feet on Septimus's lightning shot, handed out the small rolls of manuscript. 11:30 and by rights, of course, should have been in Gryffindor Tower. At the start, whenever he headmaster chooses to tell us where we'll begin, I'll fly over the castle to get a view of where we are with Rocky. He gestured his head towards Julian, who grinned down at Septimus. You and Doriel, Rufus, will collect whatever note we send down. She knows Fly and Rocky, but she's not so good with Darren, so we'll keep it simple. Righto, nodded Rufus, upside down as he was over the branch of the tree just outside the school's buildings but within the edgestones. Then she'll go down to you, Septimus. Rufus grinned. His dark black hair, which could generously be described as tousled, and ungenerously as dragged through hedge backwards, bobbing in the now chilly easterly wind. Just check the note of the location of the first clue is safe in her leg ribbon, Darren added, his fastidiousness born from his competitive streak. We don't want all our hard work to go to waste. Then Rufus'll run and come over to me, in the underground passages, finished Septimus. It was a good start. It depended on what happened after that, and of course, they couldn't plan for anything other than the opening part of the lower hunt. The game was like a treasure hunt, with real treasure, so the headmaster had explained. But Septimus knew from experience that it might be metaphorical treasure, like something with sentimental value rather than gold or emeralds, for example. It was Friday, their second night out here. Darren had suggested coming out the night before and they'd had a talk about what they might need to do in advance. The teams that were involved in the lower hunt had been given a rough area in which the first part would be found. From then on it was the team's interpretation of the clues that would make a difference. The night before Darren had thought about how they could best use their skills and what they would need. All three of them had, however, been in hot water when they'd got back to Julian, still weak in the hospital wing, for not taking him with them, and so that night, based around Madame Pomfrey's set your watch by the schedule, Julian had been smuggled out by Septimus and Darren, narrowly avoiding being caught by Professor Crowfoot, the Hufflepuff head of house, as they headed down the wide corridor that led towards the teaching rooms. Septimus could have done without it all, last night and tonight. He had been feeling run down and tired yesterday, and today even worse. A night's sleep was what he needed. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or a bug of some kind. He'd felt like before, a couple of weeks after starting. Nerves, Professor Snape had said, after giving him a potion to make him feel better. It seemed worse now he was out of doors. but there was no way he was going to admit a little bit of nausea and dizziness when it had taken every ounce of Julian's strength to get out of the hospital wing. Out through the courtyard they'd crept, the professor's footsteps dying away as they had crouched behind a bush, and it was only when Rufus Lestrange had loudly said how that particular species of laurel seemed to be vibrating to a low frequency compared to the hawthorn over to the other side that they had realized they had found the fourth of their group and almost murdered him for being so loud. Loud, and random at the most inappropriate moments, that was Rufus all over. But they were used to his randomness, especially that which concerned owl training. As they made their way back to where Rufus had chosen to tell them this completely irrelevant fact, the conversation had turned to the relevant qualities of different brooms. It was without question that the lightning shot was the best broom of all time, sleek, aerodynamic, highest quality wood and the lightest of metalwork in the shape of lightning bolts. The boys discussed the other brooms that they knew students had in school. Flame songs, whose origins in Wales were somewhat interesting as they were literally a cottage industry down in a little village in Pembrokeshire. Fast, nippy, the flame songs could be made to sing, hen fladwyn hardaw when flown at a certain speed and height, and when others were flown adjacent the brooms would harmonize. Cool. But only if you're Welsh and like hearing your national anthem as you fly. Darren dismissed. Now, bread of heaven. That's more like it. Septimus and Julian both shook their heads in the darkness and chuckled a little. Well, which would you choose? Darren asked, a little crestfallen. If you couldn't choose the lightning shot for Saturday. A clean sweep, said Septimus, swallowing away a wave of not quite right. Reliable. Dependable. Wasn't it your father's clean sweep that you said you'd told your Uncle K that you'd rather walk than bring it here with you?